Good morning.
Morning. Morning.
So this week, Diane and I went to a library in Ralston, and we had they were having a lunchtime event, and we were the entertainment. I was mostly the entertainment, but I got to rope Diane in on a few parts of it so that they didn't just hear me talk. They wanted someone to come and talk about the monks who had done the walk to Washington. And I think somebody pointed out to them, you know, we're Zen, we're not Theravada, that wasn't us. They're like, oh no, that's okay. We just want somebody who can talk about it and, you know, tell us what it was about. They're like, okay. So I made my best effort to do that, and then pivot toward what we do and how it's related and what they can do. And anyway, in the course of that, there weren't too many that were familiar with Buddhism, and that was a big part of it. They wanted to know what this is about and what would drive this kind of action. And so I said, well, if you want the Reader's Digest version in 2 words, everything changes. And I did elaborate a little more than that. But I realized that is at the heart of pretty much everything we do, everything we practice, pretty much everything. Everything changes. From one instant to the other, things change. And sometimes we notice, and most often when I think about the number of changes that occur just in my presence in the course of a day, both inside and outside, I probably recognize a tiny fraction of them. And I wanted to find a way to talk about it that sort of encapsulated a period of time in my life. And I have been doing this practice. I did it during the pandemic, but I started doing it again because I realized how much I enjoy it and how much I learn from it. It's not a Buddhist practice, and yet it is, because well, let me tell you what it is, and then I'll explain how it's related. At the beginning of the pandemic, a friend gave me a book. It was a Norton anthology on poetic forms. And when I got it, I decided my poetry, as many poems as I've written over my lifetime, and there are many, I never learned how to write poetry. And so they're what I would call seat of the pants poetry mostly. They don't rhyme, many of them, except the ones when I was in grade school. I actually still have one of those, believe it or not. And I didn't really know any forms except sonnets because I like Shakespeare, and haiku because I did a haiku workshop with Clark Strand and Natalie Goldberg, so I learned how to do haiku. And when you're writing in a poetic form, as a friend recently reminded me, it has restraints, it has rules. And usually they function to make you more precise in what you're saying. And it seems like it would be less because you have less flexibility in the language you use. And if it rhymes, you have less of a choice of words. And that's a problem. If you think you're a free will and, I can write anything thing, person. You don't want to be restrained in that way. But when you are, it's, here's the connection to Zen, just in case you might have missed it. When you follow a schedule in a temple, you're restrained. You're restricted to certain times, especially when you're doing a sesshin, because you're also not supposed to read, you're not supposed to talk, you're only supposed to eat when you're told, and then you're restricted to the food in your bowls that's being offered. It can be a real pain in the neck. And yet, it serves a purpose of helping you to see who you are in those moments when you don't want the steel cut oats, you want Cocoa Puffs, you know, or you don't want scrambled tofu, you want scrambled eggs. You know, maybe you're the kind of person who wants it with ketchup. I'm not, but I have known people who do that. They're still my friends. The point is that the restrictions actually free you to look at yourself in a different way. And they also help you to pinpoint things that bother you. I can attest to this. I've sat enough sesshins to know when you come back to your seat and you find that someone has walked away with your support cushions, you find out just how homicidal you can be. And then you can find out how much of a Sherlock Holmes you can be, because the next time there's a break and everybody leaves the zendo, you stay behind to check every single seat until you find your cushions. And then I always made it a point to write a note to the person, not because I wanted to say, what a jerk you are, but I just would say, you may not have noticed, but those cushions had my initial on them and a piece of tape with my initials also on them. Those are personal support cushions. I paid for them. They do not belong to the zendo. If you do need other cushions, though, the Ino can help you find some. So please talk to the Ino instead of taking other people's cushions. Thank you. And I signed my name. I did not do it anonymously because that's not helpful. You know, one of the things that this practice does is say, stand up. Say what it is you think. Say what it is you feel. Say who you are. You know, this is a place where you can do that. There aren't always a lot of places where you can. This is one of them. I haven't always done that. It took me a while before I signed my name to those notes. It took me a while to get over being homicidal for it. One of the things I found out as part of the practice is that the less you have, the more you hold on tight to what you do have. And I would never have known that without going to Tassajara and having only what was in one little room that was a fraction the size of this room. That was it. So things constantly change, even in a place where you're doing the same practice day after day after day. You're eating with the same people, you're seeing the same territory, you're in a place that's basically about 1.5 miles long and 1/4 mile wide. Not real big. I mean, you can walk up the road, but, you know, it's pretty painful because it's steep and it's gravelly and everything. But the point is that change is constantly happening. And so I'm actually not going to talk about Tassajara, though. I wrote a poem in the course of playing with poetic forms. And it's a form I used before because I went through the whole book. And it's called a pantoum. And it comes out of India, and it has a really an interesting pattern. And you'll hear the pattern because lines are repeated and there are rhymes. And it's because it was an oral tradition, and that's one of the ways you were able to memorize easily, which actually we find in a lot of our texts is that the early versions of those were also oral tradition, because not everybody had access to a way to write or a way to read. So anyway, I'm going to read this and then talk about change. But as you're listening to it, listen to how many things change over the course of this poem, big and small. And it's, I should explain one thing. It was written about my experience of the Camino de Santiago. So when you hear the word peregrino, which is the first word here, it's Spanish for pilgrim. And it's called This Day. Peregrino, you're well on your way. The way of St. James is your goal. Your private Camino this day to be able to follow the whole. The way of St. James is your goal. Saint Jean Pied de Port, the start. To be able to follow the whole demands strength and persistence and heart. Saint Jean Pied de Port, the start, over Pyrenees switchbacks and trails, demands strength and persistence and heart. The first day, your leg strength, it fails. Over Pyrenees switchbacks and trails, your heart and persistence are true. The first day, your leg strength, it fails. The one consolation, the view. Your heart and persistence are true. The next town, a brand new beginning. The one consolation, the view, not of trails, of the fight you are winning. The next town, a brand new beginning. When failing, it's easy to weep. Not of trails, of the fight you are winning. The learning curve tends to be steep. When failing, it's easy to weep. To move through the tears, you keep walking. The learning curve tends to be steep. To survive, you try loving, not mocking. To move through the tears, you keep walking, taking the trail at your pace. To survive, you try loving, not mocking. The Camino's a practice, no race. Taking the trail at your pace, the housing ahead is a mess. The Camino's a practice, no race. You'd need buses and cabs, roadway chess. The housing ahead is a mess. Between fires and tourists, no bed. You'd need buses and cabs, roadway chess. The answer's not here, it's ahead. Between fires and tourists, no bed. You need to sit down and take stock. The answer's not here, it's ahead. In Pamplona, you'll see if you walk. You need to sit down and take stock. As pilgrims keep hiking, you ride. In Pamplona, you'll see if you walk. But how do you feel deep inside? As pilgrims keep hiking, you ride. Thoughts of Ireland, the ocean, intrude. But how do you feel deep inside? And how many days will you brood? Thoughts of Ireland, the ocean, intrude. As you walk in Pamplona, you know. And how many days will you brood? Brooding's over, to Ireland you go. As you walk in Pamplona, you know. Peregrino, you're well on your way. Brooding's over, to Ireland you go. Your private Camino, this day. So of course the big change was I never made it to Santiago de Compostela. I never made it past Pamplona. And did I fail? Yeah, in one way I did. I didn't finish the Camino de Santiago. And there are a lot of choices that different people make when they come up against that in the Camino or in life. There are stay in Pamplona, regroup, figure out all the housing, and then start again. I actually looked into sort of bypassing a lot of it and going to Finisterre, which is one of the parts of the Camino. past Santiago de Compostela, which is on the ocean. And I thought, well, I could spend a couple weeks there and do a lot of writing. You know. And then, of course, I kept thinking about Ireland and how I'd wanted to go to Ireland, but it was too expensive. And the Camino, you know, you could actually manage the Camino on very little a day because of the albergues and, you know, which are hostels, and some of them are very inexpensive. And the answer is there's no right answer. There's no wrong answer. There's just your answer. And for me, it was kind of, it ended up being a no-brainer. I had the opportunity to go to Ireland. I looked into the possibilities of what it was going to cost to get me there, which was ridiculously cheap. And I found housing almost immediately in two places I wanted to go that I could afford. And I said, okay, don't fight it, do it. And I tossed my pages and pages of detailed notes of every single day and every mile I was going to walk on the Camino, because it's 500 miles from Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port to Santiago de Compostela. And I said, I guess I'm not doing that. I guess I'm punting and trying another play. And I did. And I had a lot of moments of sitting with the sense of failure. That first night was really, it was intense. The Vicente, the man who, he and his wife owned the place where I was staying, he said, oh yeah, we have room for you tonight. You'll have to stay in the dorm with everybody else, but, you know, we have room for you. And then tomorrow you can, you know, we'll drive you back out to where you stopped and you can keep going. And I said, no, that's not happening. I need to take the bus to the next place I have a stay planned, which was Roncesvalles. And I need to go there and start over. And I did, and I walked a few days, and that was when I found out, oh, there was a fire up ahead, and the albergue is not usable, and there's nowhere to sleep. And then I found out how many people had made their plans ahead, so the reservations at the albergues which are supposed to be, you show up, but that wasn't happening anymore. And there's an opportunity there too. Yes, it was different from what I expected. And I had an outcome in mind. I wanted to finish the Camino de Santiago. My dad had died roughly 8 months before. I'd settled his estate. I wanted to walk the Camino. I wanted that to be a kind of pilgrimage of letting go of my dad. My mother had already died, and I had no idea what my life was going to be like. I'd been living with him. I moved back to be with him while he was healthy. He wasn't even sick. And it was, I mean, I would do it again. It was wonderful. I sat on the back porch with him so many nights, listening to the same stories I'd heard so many times. And I thought, and this is why I'm here. Because he needs someone to tell his stories to. And someone needs to hear them so they can be shared with the rest of the family. Not that my sister and brother and some of his grandkids hadn't heard them as well. But it always helps to have that extra couple of times so you can be sure you get the details right. Anyway, the point is that I had expectations. I had an outcome planned. And everything changed, and I had to pivot. And the option to sit there and feel like a failure and cry about it and, you know, why did this happen to me? You know, why couldn't it be some other time that the fire happened? I mean, it's easy to go that route. And I won't kid you that, you know, I did let the failure sit there for a little while that first night. But I was talking to other people who were about to start out the next day. And one couple who had started out that day, gone a certain way, then came back and were doing what I had planned to do. And I got to know them a little bit that night. And they had no guidebook. They had no, well, I mean, one of the things you do, you take trash bags because in your backpack, you want to have a liner so if it really pours, everything can be protected and you have plastic for the top. And it does rain in Spain. Not mainly in the plane. Sorry, little My Fair Lady reference. And they had no protection for their stuff for the rain that was about to come the next day. So I said, well, I have some extra garbage bags, so let me give you those. And I had 2 guidebooks. Why did I take 2 guidebooks? Because I'm the kind of person that always wants to take the main one, which is the Brierley guide. But then I really liked some of the things in the other one. And, you know, if it's about carrying a book, I just say, I'll take the weight and carry the books. But again, another opportunity, somebody who didn't have a guidebook. So I gave them one. And I stayed with the one I had. And I was still thinking I was going to walk the whole thing at that point. That was still my planned outcome. I just wasn't going to do it exactly the way I wanted to. And then I made the decision to go to Ireland. And again, not exactly what I wanted. One of the things that I found most difficult when I started to practice Buddhism was letting go of the outcome. Letting go of what I wanted to happen, how things were supposed to play out in my plans for the universe and me. Norman Fisher, who was one of the abbots at Zen Center and who's still teaching and has written some incredible books, Norman wrote a poem about Zazen, meditation practice. And ever since I heard this line from that poem, I've tried to remember it not just with meditation, but with life. He says, sitting with alert anticipation, expecting nothing. Not that you expect a negative nothing, like, you know, I get nothing in this world, but not expecting anything specific, just letting it unfold in front of you. Just letting go of that attempt to control your surroundings and your life and what happens to you, which we can't do anyway. And it often takes us a long time to figure that one out, but life has a funny way of not letting you be in control. The universe, you know, depending on how you phrase these things, some people would say, man makes plans, God laughs, you know. I mean, you can call it God, you can call it the universe, you can call it whatever you want. But the reality is there are things we control, which are very few, and the things we don't control, which are a lot. And how we handle that is one of the things this practice is really good at helping us learn. Because if you keep trying to control what you never will be able to control, that's a wonderful recipe for suffering. And if that's what you're looking for, go for it. You'll get it. No guarantee, but I think it's a real good bet that you will get suffering if you try to control everything. On the other hand, there are some things, you know, we can control. One of them is our response to what happens. Do we turn it into failure or do we turn it into an opportunity? Do we look at the options, make a decision, and then spend years wondering, what if I'd done the other thing? How pointless is that? Not to be flip, because this is not flip, but it will sound like it. In the immortal words of Leroy Jethro Gibbs, I trust my gut. If you don't know who Leroy Jethro Gibbs is, he's a character on NCIS. And if you lived with my dad, you watched NCIS, you watched Blue Bloods, you heard him talk about, I wish I could sit at that dinner table with them. And I'm like, Dad, they're actors. It's not really a family. But, you know, after the fourth or fifth time telling him that, I stopped. I thought, no, let him dream, you know. But it's a great line. And it was sometimes, if you ever watched the show, that was sometimes the defining moment for the character, when he trusted his gut and he was right. And there were times when he was wrong. And it was a part of how they wrote the show, to let you see both. You learned about the characters on that show, on any good show. But in your life, you learn about yourself. And it's much more fun to watch a TV show and watch other people learning about themselves. It's usually not a lot of fun when it's you. But it can be. Like writing the poem. Finding the precision of that form, the pantoum, which comes from thousands of years ago, speaking to me about my experience on the Camino. I never would have imagined that. But it was powerful. When I sat down and wrote that, it brought a new lens to that experience, which I've written about extensively. But I saw new things. I saw something new in how I had approached it and what it felt like in some of those moments. And I think this practice tries to prepare us for change. Tries to say everything changes, you know. Remember that. Everything changes. And there are lots of teachings on what happens when things change. But somehow, we don't always hear them until something clicks in the mind. Something just opens things up for us, like Norman's quote. Or like suddenly sitting there in Zazen and thinking about Gibbs and what he would have said here, and laughing at yourself because I'm learning Zazen from Leroy Jethro Gibbs on NCIS, a television show. And it sounds absurd, but the thing is, the teaching is everywhere, in everything. You think those cats that come visiting outside aren't the best little Buddha teachers? You think that the people who drive me crazy and who drive you crazy are not the best teachers in the world? They are. It's what Suzuki Roshi used to call potato practice. In Japan, now I mean, this is pre-World War II. He was in the monastery. And when they cleaned potatoes in the monastery at that time, you dump them all into a bucket with water, and you smush them around so they bang against each other and knock all the dirt off. Potato practice. We knock each other's dirt off. We rub up against one another and we get irritated and we don't like it, and suddenly, whoa, I feel clean. I feel different. I feel lighter. My favorite reference for when I'm feeling heavy with all the emotions that I carry and the expectations and the ideas of outcomes is that I feel like I'm walking around with Jacob Marley's chains, because we've all read the Christmas Carol or seen it. And to me, that's such a visceral image of moving through the world burdened by something I don't need. And when I can let it go, I feel physically lighter, even though it's an emotional thing and has no physical manifestation necessarily. And that's how I felt when I finished this poem, or any of these poems that I'm continuing to write. I feel lighter. I feel happy. I feel like I've changed, because the physical act of writing that out changes me. It changes an outcome that I won't know for years, which is my life. I don't know where my life is going. I mean, I have ideas, but I don't know what they are. You know, Buddha taught a lot of things. And one of the most important was, don't believe a word I say. Find out for yourself. Trust your experience, not my words. But the words, everything changes, those are pretty trustworthy words in my view. And how we cope with that, it's kind of important. I think in one way, we are so incredibly lucky in this room right now. We aren't at threat of someone dropping a bomb on us. At the moment, we're not in threat of anybody bursting in with a gun, as far as we know. That could change, but we all look reasonably well fed. Nobody looks too hungry to me, except the skinny cat who loves to come here and looks like he hasn't eaten in a week, but I know I fed him 2 hours ago, you know. But he's old and, you know, hard to not feed him. And we're lucky because we're here, getting to do this practice, getting to ask these kinds of questions instead of, how do I survive until tomorrow? And maybe some of us are asking that question, because sometimes that is a question. How am I going to make it through the night? You know, I don't know if I can do this. I've asked that question. Certainly during the pandemic, I had my nights where I wasn't sure I could make it till morning. And interestingly, I got up and wrote. Sometimes a poem, but more often just wrote. And that was a suggestion of a teacher who said, hey, if you can't sleep, you're a writer. Get up and write. Write down what's bothering you. Write down anything, but get up and write. I don't do it every time. I'm a little bit too lazy for that, but we all find our own way and our own way of coping with the change that happens. And I don't expect anybody to do what I do. I expect you to find your own way. Investigate what works for you, because it will probably be something different because you're not me. And that's okay. You find your way, and we can compare notes. So does anybody have any questions?
What's a Camino?
I'm so sorry. I guess I should have said that at the beginning. It's a pilgrimage. And the Camino de Santiago is a medieval Catholic pilgrimage, and it's called the Way of St. James because in Santiago de Compostela there's a church, and the relics of St. James are there. And so pilgrims would walk from different parts of Europe. I mean, there's a Camino that can start from Rome and go all the way to Santiago. The one I took is called the Camino Frances. It starts in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, France, crosses the Pyrenees the first day, and you're in Spain the rest of the way. There's one from Portugal, two from Portugal actually. There are ones from different places in Spain. There's one from Paris. I actually read a story of someone who walked the Camino from Brussels. So there are many ways to do it, and if you're interested in that, you know, I can point you towards some of the books. It became famous because I guess it was the 90s, because of Emilio Estevez's film The Way with his father Martin Sheen, and both of them were in the film, and Emilio wrote it and directed it as well. And I can't recommend it highly enough. It's an amazing film. It's beautiful. And, you know, it's not the greatest film ever made. It's not a big action film. I mean, there's walking and there's talking, and sometimes they eat and drink. But it really is kind of an extraordinary story of ordinary people doing something crazy and medieval, and what it means for each of the people. If you do see it, you'll enjoy Jack from Ireland. He's a character. But they're all characters. They're all wonderful people, and of course, Martin Sheen is an extraordinary actor, so you really you feel a lot when you watch his performance in this. So it's a pilgrimage, and they're now using the word, like there are Caminos in Ireland that you can do. And basically, a Camino is a pilgrimage that you go from one place to another. Mostly you walk, but you can actually, even in Spain, you can do the Camino on horseback. Some people do it on bicycles. People have done it in a wheelchair, with help, obviously. So there are a lot of ways to do it. And I think, and now some people do it with a bus a lot of the way, and then they stop at certain parts and walk, and then get back on the bus. And some people say, that's not a pilgrimage, but you know, it's their pilgrimage. Some people can't walk all that way. Some people can't make it over the Pyrenees. Some people don't have the time or the money to spend 4 to 8 weeks walking 500 miles. And they're not prepared physically to be able to do that. Is it any less important for them to have a pilgrimage where they're seeking something and they don't even know what it is? I don't think so. I think you do it because you need to. And you do it in whatever way you have to. And you do it wherever you have to. And Ireland ended up being a very big part of my Camino. In fact, my Camino shell, which is a traditional thing, hangs in the shop of Michael Quirk, the woodcarver in Sligo, Ireland, because he ended up being the reason I was on this pilgrimage. What I learned from him could never have learned anywhere else. So thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Any other questions?